Jean-Baptiste Colbert said that the art of taxation consists in so plucking the goose as to obtain the largest amount of feathers with the least amount of hissing. It is that we prepare for the plucking by Finance Minister Nhlanhla Nene next week Wednesday to find out what the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants thinks. I'm joined now by SAICA's Senior Executive for Tax Legislation and Practitioners, Munir Hassan. Welcome to the program, Munir.
Thank you, Michael, and good afternoon to your listeners. Thank you for having me on your show.
Now, surely South Africa's only long-term option for growing tax revenues is to grow the economy. So how do we aid growth via the budget?
Michael, I think, there's been a lot of talk about the fact that, and I think where it stems from is, last year the Minister of Finance said that there is increases of taxes that we can see on the horizon. And I think the reason for that was really to stem or to deal with the growing deficit that we're dealing with at the moment. Now, I guess, like you say correctly, where does this taxes or where does the solutions lie in? And as SAICA, I think what we're saying is, to a large extent, like you correctly put out, it will come from unblocking red tape in the economy and actually trying to make it as easy as possible for businesses to trade. And in doing so, that will unblock the economy and free up trade quite easily. I think as an example, quite a simplistic example is where companies want to actually register for WITSARs, for example. That kind of processes should be quite simplistic and made as easy as possible for companies to come onto the register and actually trade and pay taxes.
And really get into that missing middle that we often talk about when it comes to SMEs paying tax. Now, Munir, I was speaking to a tax practitioner last week who preferred to remain anonymous, chatting on the sidelines of the mining indaba. On their books, only 2 companies have taken advantage of Treasury's headquarter company regime system, which was really in response to what the Mauritians are doing with regards to attracting businesses into Mauritius to make the African island their HQs. And he reckoned that some 70,000 entities now have their Africa-focused HQs in the island nation. Why is that the HQ company regime system failing so spectacularly?
I think, Michael, what happens with the HQ regime, and it is a National Treasury's clear policy position to try and position South Africa as a gateway into Africa. But I must say, in that regard, we have been a bit slow off the mark over there, because way before Treasury introduced some of these policy decisions and in fact created the HQ regime for South Africa, the concepts of HQ and a lot of companies in terms of going to Mauritius and via Mauritius into Africa had already transpired. So a lot of international companies were already using Mauritius as a springboard into the rest of Africa. And then a couple of years later, we actually came aboard from a treasury point of view, almost to compete with Mauritius to create our own headquarter company regime. That could be one of the possibilities as to why there's such a low uptake, as you mentioned. You mentioned 2 companies, but in addition to that, when we compete with Mauritius, Mauritius tax rates are particularly low in itself. I mean, we're looking at corporate tax rates, flat tax rates across the board, something like 15%, and it's quite difficult for South Africa to compete with those kind of rates, given where we are. We're talking of actually increasing tax rates at the moment.
And what will an increase in corporate income tax rate mean for SA Inc. and foreign earners as well?
Michael, having said that, I hope there isn't going to be an increase in the corporate tax rate on the horizon, and when the minister stands up next week. And the reason I say that is that our tax rate is already sitting at about 28%. That's our flat company tax rate. And if we compare that globally, we're looking at about 24%. So we're already on the higher end. And if we couple that with an increase, or we actually look at an increase in the company tax rate, that obviously brings in other issues where, for example, it could affect unemployment.
He listens to Psycho because I think it's eminently sensible to rather expand the size of the pie than slice it differently. Thanks so much for your time, Muneer.
Thank you, Michael.
That was Psycho Senior Executive for Tax Legislation and Practitioners, Muneer Hassan, with this week's tax feature here on Classic Business. Time for the Tuesday Market Wrap with Werner Roberts, Portfolio Manager at SBG Securities. Great to talk to you again, Werner.
Good afternoon.
Now, fears of a Greek exit, or Grexit as it's become known, are really starting to grow. It seems that there's a real impasse underway at the moment. The question, though, is should the market fear a Greek exit, or will this actually be beneficial in the long term?
Well, some economists believe that it might be beneficial in the long term, but there's definitely going to be a lot of pain short term.